fire off the main theme.
Well, last time, remember, we actually recorded with Trevor, so that's something to be aware of.
From Los Angeles, the home of film and television, this is Film Music Live, a webcast featuring outstanding composers, orchestrators, filmmakers, and more from the world of music for film, television, and video games, talking about their work and answering your questions. Film Music Live is sponsored by the Film Music Network and Film Music Institute. And now the host of Film Music Live, Daniel Schweiger.
Hi, I'm Daniel Schweiger, and welcome to Film Music Live on Facebook. It's the show where I talk to today's top composers, and you also get to ask the questions. I'm happy to have you here. In a prolific scoring career that specialized in such genre shows as Star Trek Discovery, Picard, For All Mankind, Altered Carbon, and Legion, composer Jeff Russo has been a team player who's often been called on to bring the band back together. But for all the trouble that the Federation, a future American Space Force, or a one-man psychic army might have finding their way about the time stream, these groups positively have it sunny when compared to the Umbrella Academy. Adapted by Netflix from the comic series by Gerard Way and Gabriel Ba, the Umbrella Academy takes the time-honored idea of a superhero training ground for the misunderstood to lunatic and apocalyptic extremes of a power pack who've grown into very troubled adults. Their drolly funny psychoses ended up destroying the Earth at the end of the last season. Now, with Season 2, the Umbrella Academy are sent to Kennedy assassination-era Dallas in 1963, where they end up destroying the world once again. It's up to simultaneously oldest and youngest super assassin number to get his awkward family back together to save the retro day, a mission powerfully abetted by Jeff Russo's symphonic forces that unite ironic comedy, high-stakes suspense, and drama drawn from real-world emotion with distinctive themes, instrumentation, and forceful feeling that once again make the Umbrella Academy into one of television's most unique superhero team shows. And now here to talk about the uniting the Umbrella Academy's distinctive musical voices is composer Jeff Russo. Welcome to Film Music Live, Jeff.
How you doing?
Oh, it's great to have you here. So I guess let's go back to the beginning and tell us how you were recruited for the Umbrella Academy.
Well, you know, a lot of this business is about relationships, right? And about who you've worked with and who, you know, you have a filmmaking simpatico thing with. So I worked with Steve Blackman. He was a producer on one of the seasons of Fargo, second season of Fargo. And he in that I got to know him, and then he went off to do Altered Carbon, and he asked me to come on board to Altered Carbon, which I did. And in working with him on that, he then left before we were finished with Altered Carbon as he was developing Umbrella Academy, and then asked me to join him for working on Umbrella Academy. So that's really how that happened. You know, we started having conversations early on about what the sound of a show like this could be, and how to really play these very unique characters in this very sort of offbeat way, and because they're not your typical superhero, and they're also not your typical anti-superhero. They're sort of extremely unique, you know, taken from Gabriel Ba and Gerard's really, really, really wonderfully rich and dynamic comic, or it's not comic, it's a what do you call it? I call it a comic, but it's a book. It's got a story, and it's drawn. Anyway, that's really how that happened. You know, my previous relationship with Steve Blackman really helped me sort of draw that straight line between us working on one project right to the current project. You know.
Now, what struck you about the Umbrella Academy, about it being particularly oddball? I mean, you certainly played very eccentric, unique superhero characters with shows like Legion.
You know, again, these characters are more human than they are superhuman. They have these powers, but they act and react very unlike superheroes. They act and react like humans, and I think that's what makes it a unique style of telling a story. You know, it's this story of this family that is sort of brought together, and in that creates a really unique dynamic, you know, for these characters that have these very unique abilities. So that's what makes it offbeat. They're not really offbeat. I mean, they have their quirks and their eccentricities, just like every, you know, human being does. And what I try to do, and what I tried to do when we first sort of thought about what the score for a show like this would be, before we started season one, is to really come at it from an emotional point of view and really play music that is centered around what our characters are feeling, not necessarily what our characters are doing. And that's something that I try to impart on every filmmaker I've worked with. Is that idea of playing what a character feels and not what a character does. You know, it's really important for me to do it that way, because otherwise I feel like we're telling the story that's already being told. We're not telling the story that can't be told with the picture. You know, we're what I feel like we're supposed to be doing as composers for visual media is to try to tell the story that isn't told by the picture necessarily. It's the stuff that goes on underneath that the writer wants to tell, but doesn't necessarily come across just in a two-dimensional image and sound, you know, dialogue. There's a lot of underneath stuff, and that's the beauty of this particular show. I mean, you know, it's the beauty of any really well done narrative, is there's all of this subtext, and I get to play the subtext. I get to sort of figure out how to tell that story.
So, you know, what's interesting about the new season, it's kind of like Avengers headquarters gets utterly destroyed, where, you know, the familiarity of the first season is, I mean, not for obvious reasons, completely ripped away. You know, Vanya's just brought the moon down, the Earth is completely wiped out. And now we're in Dallas in 1963. What's it like losing, for you as a composer, that the pogo and just the headquarters, and stripping all of this away and really throwing these characters into a new situation?
Well, you know, again, I don't really base what I like to do on exactly what is going on. It's really about, these are the same characters. They're having the same sort of human reactions and human interactions that they did in a completely different context. So yes, we're telling a different story. We've stripped away some of the things that we're used to from season one, and we're now starting a whole new way of telling this story. But really, it's a continuation of their saga. It's a continuation of their feelings and their interaction. So it didn't stray too far for me. We introduced some really cool new characters, and that's always very interesting to me in terms of how I can help tell the story. Is how do we tell the story with new character themes or new character interactions? And those things are really important to me. But I will say in this second season. I enlisted the help and collaboration of a longtime assistant of mine to come and be a collaborator, a co-composer on this season. Her name is Perrine Virgile, and we couldn't have gotten this done without her. And I want to make very clear that this second season, she does a lot of work, a lot of interesting things have happened because of our collaboration on this. And I would be remiss if I didn't mention that as we're talking about the creation of the score for the second season. For whatever reason, I can't hear you right now. I see your mouth moving, but I don't hear you. I'm assuming this means you can hear me, so I can continue talking. Again, I see your mouth moving.
And Jeff, sorry to jump in here. We're working on some technical issues. We should be back with Daniel in just a moment. He's having a sound issue.
Okay. Do you need me to sign off and sign back on?
Nope. We're still live. We're so good. Why don't you keep talking? And we'll pop Daniel back in as soon as we have him back. Thanks, Jeff.
Sure. I can figure something out. Anyway, I was talking about. Sure, I was talking about bringing on Perrine Virgile to work this season with me, and she had assisted me in the first season and has worked on my team for quite a long time. And you know, she she's extremely talented. Just wanted to make sure that was really apparent. Um, what I will say about season two is, as I was saying before, the interesting part of the show in moving into a season two is the completely sort of realignment of, you know, what these characters are doing. I really do feel like there has been a growth in the way the characters interact with each other. Although there's always that sense of the familiar with them, and that has always been one of the great things about this particular show is the chemistry between the actors really created this playground for the music, you know, and the music
Uh-huh.
really lives in a place where I think we can play along with them, and that has always been a lot of fun for me um, to uh, to sort of to jump into. You know, I think we have you back now, right, Dan?
Yes, we do. So what just
Yeah,
happened
there you go.
was the time agency almost got me right there. It almost happened. I
You were
saw him
ta
coming.
yeah.
I did. I totally did the jump in and out of time. So you see, this is our kind of 4D show where I have to deal with this horrible blonde woman and the talking goldfish dude. So okay, we're back again. My apologies for the technical snafu there. Um,
Don't
so
worry.
now I want to do, one thing that I love about the show is how you really distinguish each of the characters, especially in the new season. So I want to do with you an Umbrella Academy roll call and tell me a little bit about what goes into each character. And I want to start with my favorite, who is Vanya.
Well, when you say what goes into each character, you know, the same thing goes into each character. What I would say is each character, they live and breathe on their own, right? So you sort of have to sit there and write a piece of music that feels right for them in pace and in emotional brevity. So I feel like they all get what feels right to me. So it's hard to sort of split it up in like, what do you do for this person and what do you do for this person, what do you do for that person, because it's really not how I like to approach a score at all. I like to approach a score from a much grander point of view, from a much more 30,000 foot view of a narrative, and then you do have to come down and zero in. um, but it's not just about those individual things. It is more about the sort of grand scheme of it. With Vanya, it was very simple to figure out what her sound would be and what her vibe would be, because her character spoke volumes about that. Not to mention her character was a violinist, or is a violinist. So it was easy for me to make the decision like, oh, okay, violin is definitely her main instrument. But if when you listen closely, you'll realize it's not always violin playing for Vanya. Um, it's not always that thing. I don't like to say like, oh, okay, so clarinet is only for Klaus or violin is only for Vanya. I don't like to do that, because then you get caught in a box, and I don't ever want to be in a situation where I feel like, oh, I can't do this one thing that I want to do because that's for this thing over here. It's really about like how to make the music fit the scene or the character at that given moment.
Well, then how about this? I think there are really some really wonderful standout.
I didn't mean to rain on your parade
Oh, not at all, not at all.
with that question.
Not at all. Well, you know what? Maybe we should talk about some of my favorite moments in the second season.
Sure.
One thing that I really liked about the season in particular is how very relevant it is to, what's happening with race in this country. And a
Mm,
really
yeah.
impactful sequence where you kind of know that we're going into some really dramatically pertinent areas is the lunch counter protest in season
Yeah.
3. And that's a really powerful musical moment when that protest starts. Can you talk about, I mean, again, watching maybe for yourself Black Lives Matter protests and how it may have played into scoring this whole story, this whole character arc?
Well, I mean, when we spotted that, when we went to spot that particular scene, it was one of those moments where you see it. It's hard to watch. It's hard to watch because what you know is like this is the way it was. This is the way it is. These feelings that are expressed by in this particular scene's antagonist um, are still felt and expressed by people today, and that's it's hard to imagine. It's hard to swallow. It's hard to just accept that we haven't come as far as I think some of us would like to think that we've come with a lot of this stuff. So in thinking about how to do that, how to express that in music, it's not a simple thing because it's not just sit down and write something that feels emotional. It really needed to be it needed to feel important, and yet it also needed to stay out of the way of the emotion of the scene, because you don't want to press too hard on something like that, because you don't want to lead the audience. You want to let the audience feel what's being expressed in something like that, and sort of try to support and guide, but not push along. Um, and that was a really important, I think, a really important choice to make there. And we talked about it. Steve and Perrine and I talked about it while we watched that particular scene, and we all sort of knew. We all sort of had the same idea about that type of scene and how to put music there without it feeling too on the nose and without it feeling too much like you're pushing something really dark, even though something really dark was going on.
Another recurrent theme in the season are, coming to terms with sexuality. And in this case, it's Klaus and Vanya who are essentially both trying to get the people they care about to come out of the closet, especially in 1963.
Yeah, and again, one of the great things of doing this sort of period, time travel-y type of thing is you get to explore those ideals and those emotional arcs with characters, because you take a character from the present and put them in a time when this other way of life was going on, and this other sort of way that people went through their lives, people who didn't trust that they could be honest about themselves. So it's a very interesting idea for me, for us as a creator of the emotional sort of content behind what's going on, um, to to give that a sound, and to give that, for lack of a better way of putting it, to give it life, from an oral perspective. So that's always a lot of, I want to say a lot of fun, but it's more very interesting and very uh, engaging for us, I think, to get to be involved in telling that kind of story.
Now, one thing I love about the Umbrella Academy scoring is that you never really know where the music is going to go. And in episode 6, one of the really creative things you have is, as as Rumor is being pursued, you have gospel music, I believe, in the score as she runs into the barber shop.
Um, it's interesting. Yes, you, here's the perfect example of something that we're pulled into. It was a while ago when we worked on that particular scene, and I do remember because there was this temp, and the temp was this gospel song, but they didn't want to use a song. They wanted it to have the feeling of gospel, but it needed to be score. So, you know, trying to make that happen without basically writing a gospel song is a difficult task. And there's the perfect example of being led down that path. Like that wasn't really a choice. That was a choice that was already made, and they were like, we really like this, but we don't want it to be a song. We want it to be score. So how do we do that? And I remember talking to Perrine about that specific thing, which is, well, okay, we need to figure out how to do that and yet not do that. So it had to sort of be a little of both things, and that's always a very difficult thing to do.
Huh. And in that episode as well, you have like essentially tiki music as they're having dinner with their dad.
Say again.
I think
You
there's like a
dropped out.
there's tiki scoring in that episode as well.
You know, it right now, what I would tell you is when things like that come up, there are ideas that are thrown around in the spotting session, and our producer will say, "Well, what about something like this, or what about something like that?" And sometimes there's temp that they fall in love with, and a lot of times we have to sort of follow that that guide, because they spend a lot of time sort of crafting a temp score that they really dig. Sometimes those choices do come out of interesting conversations, um, like this particular piece that you're talking about, and that was just meant as trying to do something a little different and have a little fun. Like what we get to do in this particular show is we get to play in this sandbox with a lot of different Tonka toys, for lack of a better way to put it. It's like we get to do a lot of fun stuff because we have this very eclectic group of people together that you really never know what's going to happen. So why would we ever always want to do that with music? So we get to make these fun choices.
Now, in episode 8, one of my favorite episodes, and has probably my favorite cue of the entire second season, is Vanya is the bomb. Is there in the FBI building, and essentially Vanya is going full on Dark Phoenix. And they have to reach her. And what makes that cue so powerful is just it's like, again, the incredible cue at the ending of season 1, where they're in the concert hall trying to stop her. And it's the same kind of idea where again it's just conveying all of this incredible emotion of this family trying to stop, to someone who's completely gone out of control.
Well, again, it goes to the same thing I was talking about before, which is try not to do what you see and try to score what the character is feeling. And, Perrine and I talk a lot, or have talked a lot, about that idea for this season of Umbrella Academy. And, you know, we would always, and I would always rather err on the side of find the emotion, find that content, and really sort of play that, rather than like, there's all this tension, so we better have these tension drums, or there's all this action, so we better have these big action strings. I'd rather not do that, because that's the thing that you'd expect. And this is the kind of show that I think, have always tried to do the unexpected. From everything from the storyline and the characters and their interaction to the way we approach the music, from songs to score.
Now, I mean, so much of the show revolves around the Kennedy assassination. It's something that might be just completely unknown to a great deal of the people who are watching the season. So it's a pretty risky move to use that as a major league plot device. What does the Kennedy assassination mean to you?
I wasn't alive yet, so what it means to me is it's a part of history for me, and it's something that I learned very young. My mom and my dad, they remember where they were when they found out, and they would always sort of say that to me whenever we were talking about that. You know, but to me, it's always great telling stories like that to an audience that might not even really register what that's about. Obviously you learned about this in school, um, but it isn't as close to people's hearts now as it was when I was growing up. And so maybe it was a little bit easier for me to understand then and now, and it's a little bit closer, but it does mean a lot because I think that we're able to help keep that memory going. It was a really pivotal time in our history as a country. Everything that was going on in that time, from race relations to the relations of us with Russia, and that the beginning of the Cold War, and and the assassination of Kennedy, the assassination of Martin Luther King. I mean, just many things were all happening at that time, and there was this groundswell of rebellion, and people may not. People of the younger generation may not be completely in touch with that, and I think it's really wonderful that we can tell that story in a really interesting and engaging way for people who might not be that connected to that part of the story.
Now, how all the threads come together, obviously, in the final episode, where the temporal agency sends probably 1,000 people after them in that barn. How difficult was it scoring that last episode, where really you had to pay everything off essentially?
Yeah, it's one of those things where um, you get moving on something, right? You get into you get through season one, you get into season two, you start out with season two, and like we have these conversations about new themes for new characters and what's this going to sound like, what's that going to sound like. And by the time you get to episode three, things start to smooth out a little bit. You kind of figure out what you're doing, where you are, and then episodes 3 through 9 have a flow to them. There's a flow, and things usually go well. In this particular case, they went really well, really smooth. We get to episode 10, and it wasn't that things didn't go smooth, but all of a sudden we all have our microscopes out again, because we do have to pay off the story of the last 9 episodes. We have to pay off an even bigger story, and the payoff is character wide and narrative wide. That starts at the beginning of season one, and probably does. I mean, it doesn't end, but it does resolve into the next moment that we have to get to. Because I'm assuming that we're going to be, doing a season 3 episode 1. And how will this episode musically tie into the next one? For us, we knew exactly how to tie from the last moment of the end of episode 10 of season 1 into the first episode of season 2, because they were leaving that stage. They were leaving the end of the world to go to a place where the world wasn't ending, and this is where they ended up. And then they ended up in the mess anyway. So it was all sort of interconnected. I don't, however, know how we're going to begin a season 3. Hopefully we have one. So it is a little more complicated, sort of trying to think about how we can leave a door open to something and also at the same time wrap up this story and wrap up the emotional arc of what's been happening over the last 9 episodes before it. So is it any harder than the stuff that we work on daily? No, not really. It's just a little more brain power at that moment, because you sort of are used to that. For the last 5-6 episodes, things have been sort of moving along nicely, and then you get to that end and you have to make that resolution, and you got to really think about how you're going to do that.
Now I want to start getting to some audience questions, so please send me in questions. Lakeshore Records is being super cool and providing 5 downloads of the first season of Umbrella Academy. And I want to start off with our first question from Louis Virtullini, who is a big fan, as I am, of Fargo, which today had big news that just was announced the premiere date. Can you, again, obviously completely different style, which shows just how versatile you are. Tell me about working on Fargo and what it means to finally have the new season finished.
Well, I've been working on this season of Fargo since Oh my God, since a year ago, since last summer. Last summer I started writing, and I read this. I read the first scripts. I started writing themes for the characters. I started writing themes for the ideas of what Noah had been creating for this new season. So to finally, and then we were supposed to be done back at the beginning of April, and obviously we were cut short of finishing the season by about 11 days, which is maddening since we almost got there. But we are going back. They are going to finish, and it's thrilling because to be sitting on this kind of story and to be sitting on the work that we've been doing for that long it's hard because you want to share it. You want to get it out there, and have people listen to it. This season musically for me is quite different. It is quite different. I mean, there's all of the things that you would expect, I think, from a score that I would do for Fargo, but there's so much more this season musically that you haven't heard, and that's been sort of thrilling for me to really get into something completely different.
Well, because obviously Chris Rock is in this, and it deals with the warfare between an Italian mob and a black mob. What can we expect? What kind of styles or instrumentation? I mean, every episode you had the '60s, the present day, and now this.
Um, you know, uh, well, so season one was early 2000s. Season two was 70s. Season
70s.
three was 2012, I think, 2011, 2012. Now we're back in the late 40s and early 50s. So that's what season four is. Uh, I don't think that that's a spoiler alert. Pretty sure that that's common knowledge. If not, someone's going to get very mad at me. So some of the things I wanted to include, there's a little more. I'm a drummer as well as a guitar player and a piano player, or whatever other things I play in the way I write. But drums are where I sort of start my original ideas for anything. It usually comes from some sort of rhythmic aspect. So one of the things I wanted to do was really get sort of a more big band jazzy type drum feel to inject into this season, and I did that. So there's a little bit of that. There's a little more woodwinds and brass used in this season. There's still a big orchestral component to the score, and there's still a big dramatic component to the score, which has always been a hallmark for Fargo, to have these big dramatic moments, but not as much of the sort of big blasts and more of an emotional commitment to the music.
And that kind of leads into our second question from Chris Hadley. And he asks, hey, Jeff, having come out of a pop music background, does coming up with melodic ideas and themes come easier for you? Or in the process, does it make it more complex?
I actually am not even sure how to answer that question. I don't know that it makes it easier for me, but I do know that it always leads me down the road that I go, right? So I tend to write the kind of melodic material that I write, I think, because of my history. I think that I have less knowledge of the rules of orchestral writing, so I think I'm freed from that to do things that maybe people who have more experience with that than I do would do. So I think that, again, my background leads me down a certain type of path, and maybe I'm not as restricted, or I don't tend to do the things that maybe somebody would expect. But I think it's just as complex. I think it's just as complicated to sit and write a melody. I think a melody and a rhythm are the two most important things for any piece of music. I like to write things that have a melody because they're memorable. Those are the things that make me happy. Occasionally you have to write stuff that doesn't have a melody, and those things you just do. But the type of music that makes me the happiest is is melodic music. It's the kind of stuff that I like to listen to. So that's the kind of stuff that I want to write.
Now, again, I have to compliment you on how much I really enjoyed Picard. And again, just how different it was to Discovery. I mean, you are the master of all things Trek, essentially, at CBS. How nice of a detour was it to essentially kind of take a fairly different approach with Picard?
It was great. I mean, I've been a Star Trek fan for my basically my entire adult life. And I did start to become a true fan of the franchise when The Next Generation became a thing in 1988, 87, 88, whatever it was. So getting to write music for that part of this franchise is thrilling to me. This particular character is very near and dear to my heart. And this storytelling is very near and dear to my heart. So having the opportunity to write music in a different way and focus on a character rather than a much broader sense, which Discovery is a broad show. There's a lot of characters, there's a lot of story, and there's a lot of action, and there's a lot of things that are happening, and you write that kind of music for it. Still in the framework of Star Trek music. And then with Picard, you know, we're now talking about a much more intimate storytelling. It's a very individual character narrative, and each of the characters had some themes, and each of the characters have their interactions. But really, we focus more on Picard's journey than we are on the overall story. Being able to try to contextualize that among the backdrop of Star Trek music and the Star Trek canon music, was really quite thrilling for me. I got to do things that I don't get to normally do. There's some really great music that I get to quote, that I get to use. I get to use a little theme from this or a little melody from this, and then sort of meld that and thread that into something I've written. It's really, really quite thrilling. It's evidenced in that first episode where we see a Romulan for the first time in Picard, and I was like, why not use Fred Steiner's theme that he wrote the first time that we ever see a Romulan in the original series, and it was really, really fun for me to do that. I was maybe thinking like, I just wonder if anybody's even going to notice. And then, of course, as soon as it hit the air, I was bombarded with texts and tweets and emails and stuff about how great it was that I nodded to that, and it was really kind of it tickled me to hear that people were paying that close of attention to the music. But it was great. It's really fun. I as a matter of fact, I'm so geeked out. I got an email from Jay Chataway a couple of days ago, and just reaching out to ask some questions and like just to say he really enjoyed the music for Picard and doing a great job, and it was really, really nice. But to think that the guy who was writing music to the show that I loved when I was a kid, it was really quite thrilling getting an email from him. I'm kind of a nerd when it comes to that kind of stuff.
I think we're all nerds, everyone on this who watches it. But,
Sure.
I mean, I have to tell you that the Star Trek shorts are actually quite good, but I thought one that was particularly excellent, especially because of the score, was the one that led into Picard, which is Children of Mars, which had a truly haunting piano piece. Talk about scoring that.
It was interesting. So they used a piece of music for the beginning of the short. That was a Peter Gabriel piece of music, and that led into a piece of music that they asked me to write for the last third of they wanted to start with this one piece of music, Peter Gabriel, which is this beautiful piece of music that blew my mind. And then I talked to Alex about, Alex called me and asked me to score this particular short because of its connection to Picard. Originally, I wasn't going to be scoring the shorts this season because of all the work I was doing, getting ready for Picard and finishing up Discovery Season 2. But he called and said, I really would like you to do this. and can you come and take a look at that? And sitting down, and that was sort of the tipping point for me in trying to figure out what the theme was going to be for Picard, because I had written the theme. I had written a theme, and it had sort of taken a number of different forms. And when I sat down to write this piece of music for the short, it sort of all came together. So there's that piece of music, that piano piece of music that's really haunting, and then that leads into the end credits music, and that end credits music is sort of the jumping off point into the theme for Picard. So it was really nice to be able to tie the whole story together from that moment to the end of the season, with music that was all related to each other. So it was a lot of fun to do that.
Now, I have a question from James Anthony Phillips, and he'd like to know what was the most complex and challenging score, especially in terms of orchestration, that you've done?
At all, like I'm
Or right
across
up there,
all
let's
of
put
the
it that
things.
way.
I think that up to now, the most challenging from an orchestrational standpoint and like really trying to figure out what it is, was Fargo Season 2 was the most complex for me and the most challenging for me because it was as far as I'd ever gone. And when I sat down to write a piece of music called Herman's Malt for Season 2, which in that I give a nod of my hat to Mahler, Mahler 2, it that to me was a big jumping off point to something I'd never even attempted before. So I would say that season of the score, of any score I've done, was probably the most daunting, the most complex. There were a couple of pieces I had done for Legion in Season 1 and Season 2 that were also sort of the same level of fear and terror for me in trying to make it sound right. Yeah, that's where that would be the most complex, terrorizing score I've ever done.
Now, for me, I think one of the coolest and most under the radar score you've done is for Lucy in the Sky, which is this kind of very beautiful hallucinogenic score, which is based in a true story about a female astronaut who basically lost her mind.
Yeah, Lucy in the Sky. It's a labor of love. That was a labor of love. I wrote that score for about 14 months. I I I had instruments built for that score, built instruments that didn't exist in the world. I had an idea for a sound in my head, and there was nothing to do it. So I had I called a friend who makes instruments for the Blue Man Group, and I asked if he could maybe help me, and he did. There were some instruments that he built, where we talked about building these instruments, and they sent them to me, and I used them, and it was really quite a labor-intensive love affair with music for a while. It's some of the most evocative music for me. Uh, I spent a lot of time and a lot of effort making something that I had in my head on, I want to say tape, but obviously it's not tape. But you sort of get my point. Like trying to get it outside of my head I spent a lot of time trying to do that. And it's a drag that not as many people saw it as I would have liked. But that's just the way sort of it goes. It's a beautiful, beautiful movie, and I would hope that more people could see it.
Now, when you were scoring Umbrella Academy Season 2, had Corona entered the picture? And if it did, what challenges did you have in finishing the season?
The same challenges that we face currently on Star Trek Discovery, which is, we got to record the first 3 episodes with the orchestra, and then the lockdown happened. So we had to pivot to the same way we did with Star Trek: Star Trek Discovery, which is we had to record the orchestra individually. So, each individual player playing in their home and then sending us all the parts and us combining them to make the score. So that was really the big pivot for that. Now, it it didn't really hold us up. I asked for an extra 3 weeks so I could figure it out once that all happened. But once we figured it out, it did work pretty swimmingly.
How do you think what's going on has inspired your creativity or deadened it or made you struggle to get where you want to go as an artist?
I think that this is something that not a lot of people have been talking about. I think, or maybe not enough people have been talking about, and I try to talk about this all the time. You know, the pandemic, I know a lot of composers might on the outside say, oh, nothing's really changed for me. I sit in a room by myself anyway, all day long writing. However, um, I feed on collaborative effort. I feed on being in having feedback, having interaction with people, with other people. This is why I think music performed by an orchestra or even a small group or one person is so important to a narrative, because once you put two people playing something, they communicate, and communication is what we do as writers of music. It's the sort of base form of communication for me. So it's been very difficult. Sitting and writing a piece of music sometimes has taken me 10 times longer in this pandemic than it has before, and that's simply because I can't seem to focus. It has messed up my whole equilibrium in terms of how I can really drill down and find the emotional core of something, because I've lost some of myself in this, and it's very, very interesting. I've never felt anything like this before, as I'm sure none of us have. I mean, none of us. This has never happened in any one of our lifetimes. Um, and I mean, unless somebody watching is 102 years old or something, 102, yeah. Nobody has ever experienced anything like this, and I think one of the things I've tried to do is stay connected with people. Stay connected by calling, texting, FaceTiming, and really trying to have conversations. And be as connected as possible, because it's the only thing that sort of keeps my head above water. When I shut down in a room writing music for longer than a few hours, I start to get a little nutty. And under a normal time, I could walk out and talk to any one of the people who are on my team, or go outside and see somebody across the hall, or walk outside and get a coffee, and not having that ability has been really, really hard on me. It's been hard on me, and I think it's been hard on a lot of people. And I think that people, we should talk more about that, and how to deal with our emotional state in this time. It's not just about wearing masks. Yes, wear a fucking mask. I'm sorry for cursing,
Absolutely.
but everybody needs to wear a mask. Everybody needs to wear a mask, and everybody needs to wash their hands, and social distance, and just do the right thing. Like, just do the right thing. It's not hard. It's not hard to do the right thing. But on top of all that, you really need to try to feed your soul somehow. It's hard to feed your soul when you're under this sort of lockdown. It's very difficult. And what we do as writers comes from our soul. So if you're not feeding your soul's not giving much back. It's been difficult, but you try to get through it. You try to do it, and have those conversations with your close and dear friends. Have those conversations with your collaborators, and continue to try to do that, and continue to try to move forward. It's hard, but we try.
So, I mean, when you, I mean, I imagine you must look at Facebook. When you see like other artists or musicians kind of writing just nothing but positive stuff, and we're gonna get through this, do you just like automatically do a Riker facepalm?
It's everybody does what they do to get through it, right? Everybody needs to do what they do to get through any day, especially under these circumstances. So I don't judge. I don't face palm. I'm just like, oh, okay, that's what this person is able to do. Like I can't do that. I can't write a song about all the good things and all the happy things because it just doesn't feel like that right now. That doesn't mean that I can't do my job. It just means that getting there is harder. Getting to that point is just a little more difficult. And I think that was the crux of your question. It's like, how has this affected me as a composer under these circumstances? And I can tell you, it's affected me, it's affected my team, it's affected everybody in a way that is very impactful, very meaningful. And I think, I hope I'm looking out the window, I'm seeing some sunlight, I'm starting to feel like we will inch out of this. We're inching out of this and we will get there. Like I've been, talking to people about getting back into the studio with the orchestra to try to get the rest of the season done in the room as opposed to out of the room. So, you know, yeah, just take a deep breath and sigh. Just take a deep breath and sigh.
I think we're all taking a lot of deep breaths. I mean, now as you start to score the third season of Discovery, what are the lessons that you've learned from how you got through Umbrella Academy Season 2 that are going to come into play now? And on that note, what can we expect now that Discovery's in the far-flung future?
Um, you know, the expectation is you get a Star Trek score, and there's no. Like, I was having a conversation with Alex Kurtzman about it when this first happened, and he called me and he was like, Jeff, I just whatever you do, don't deliver me a synth version of our score. Just don't do that, please, if you can. And I was like, I will not let that happen. To the point where we are recording 40 individual musicians and putting it together to make it sound like our orchestra. Instead of me being in the room conducting them, we're doing it all remotely. Um, the lessons learned were how to do it. But the fact is, I had to do it right on Umbrella Academy before we did this. So, um, you know, Umbrella Academy has a slightly smaller sounding score, so we got to do it utilizing fewer people. Um, but the idea is the same. The idea is exactly the same. You've got these people recording in their bedrooms and or in their garages or in their attics or wherever they're doing it. And then you take it all and you edit it all and you try to figure out how to make it sound like we're at the Warner Brothers scoring stage or at Fox. And then make that happen so nobody notices a difference. That's our job right now. So the lessons were, oh, this is how you have to do it. Now we're just going to do it. Now we're just going to do it on a bigger scale.
Now, two shows I definitely want to mention. We're entering the second season of For All Mankind, and the NBC streaming service just debuted with Brave New World, which you scored.
Hmm. Well, okay, so Brave New World I scored with Jordan Gagne, and he's been a collaborator of mine for a long time, and that was I was really interested in that. I Aldous Huxley, the book was something I read. I don't know. I think I was like 14 or something when I read that book, and so I had a memory of it, but didn't. I had more of a memory of what it was about rather than a memory of the actual story. The specifics of the story. But it seemed like an interesting story to tell from a musical perspective. And David, who's the showrunner, was very clear about what he wanted from a score. So it wasn't. He had an ability to make decisions musically, and it really did guide us in the way that needed to happen under the guise of this pandemic, because we made that entire score during this pandemic, and a lot of it was a lot of it was in the box, and synth oriented, because there was this future element to it, and it needed to have a little bit of that sound. But that was a very interesting score to do. For All Mankind Season Two is in progress right now, and again, we got held up. We've been held up by the pandemic as well. So the although our original release date, I think, is still the same, we normally would have a lot more time to work on it than what we have now. But it's been a very interesting story to tell on that show, because where we started with Season One in telling that original part of the story where the Russians made it to the moon before we did, and then what would that do to life in general. Alternate reality shows are always fun to do, because it's just all imagination at that point.
So I guess wrapping it up, we now see the shadowy Sparrow Academy. Who knows what part they will play in Season 3? If you were the Umbrella
I'll never tell.
uh, I think you actually got to see the shot where they're visible. If you were the Umbrella Academy's psychologist, how would you tell them to resolve their issues? What would your advice be?
They all need to be medicated.
And where do you hope your music goes or continues to go? What new avenues would you like to see your scoring go for, or the characters go in that respect?
For Season 3, it's always fun to find out like what the story is. The funny part is, when we finished Season 1, Blackman had told me what Season 2 was going to be. He didn't tell me what it was going to be. He told me where we were going, where we were going to end up. Because I was like, well, what's going to happen? And he said, it's going to be 1963. We're going to play with the Kennedy assassination, that whole era. And I was like, oh, that'll be fun. So it got the brain moving. I haven't had that conversation yet with Mr. Blackman for next season. So I don't really know. And the not knowing is actually kind of fun, because it can be anything. I mean, what I know is we'll treat the score in the same way that we have emotionally. From a instrumental standpoint, we have the core group, right? We have the core sound of the show, which is this emotional sort of orchestral piano thing. But we also have the cool drums and the cool guitar stuff, and sometimes a vocal, and sometimes, so we definitely can stretch out. So what Season 3 will bring is it's as unknown to me as it is to you.
Well, I can only hope that the Umbrella Academy is sent back in time to rectify this problem that we are having now.
Yeah.
I know that he can assassinate the virus somehow. He'll come up with there's something in a briefcase that'll stop this. We won't even know it happened.
That would be very nice.
Nice. Jeff, I just want to thank you so much for joining us at Film Music Live. Watch The Umbrella Academy Season 2. It's now streaming on Netflix, Brave New World, and NBC. And you will be returning to the Emmy-winning domain of Fargo in September. So lots of great stuff coming up for you.
Thank you very much
Thanks for joining, everyone.